Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really pulling back the curtain on, global statecraft, the real rules, not the polite ones you might read about. Our sources, drawing a lot from Pedro Banos and others, are kind of giving us a shortcut to understanding the, well, pretty cynical strategies that actually drive global power.
That's exactly right. We're trying to get you beyond the day-to-day news noise. Think of this as a toolkit for seeing the long game, the geostrategic principles states operate by. And these rules, they apply everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's a democracy or, authoritarian. It's about power, economics, and, yes, psychological control coming together.
Okay, let's get into it. The fundamental rules. The sources say state motivation boils down to just raw self-interest. They point way back to a 1929 League of Nations report, which kind of nails human and national desire. Nothing is asked by those who have nothing. Those who have something ask for more, and those who have too much want to protect it.
It's stark, isn't it? But it helps make sense of things. Apply it to nations, and suddenly history feels less random, more predictably cynical. And this isn't a new idea. It's got deep roots in geopolitical theory, especially from the 19th century.
You mean like Ratzel's idea, the state as a kind of living organism?
Precisely. Ratzel, a German geographer, he pushed this idea, Cagellan refined it, that a state, just like any living thing, has to keep expanding, consuming territory or resources just to survive and grow. If it stops growing, it risks collapse, stagnation. And that idea, Lebensraum or living space, well, it got picked up by people like Haushofer and, tragically, influenced Nazi expansionism, gave it a dark, sort of pseudoscientific gloss.
So if every state is this hungry organism, what does that mean for real cooperation? Sounds like it's always just temporary, a convenience.
Which brings us straight to maybe the coldest rule of all. Alliances, you hear politicians talk about eternal friends, right? But the sources, they keep hammering this point. No eternal allies, only permanent interests.
That really cuts through the rhetoric, doesn't it? How often do we see that today? Alliances looking like pure convenience.
Oh, constantly. Interest change economics, security, maybe needing to gang up on a rival. Think back to the 16th century. You had Catholic Venice, totally dependent on Ottoman grain and trade. So what did? They repeatedly teamed up with the Ottoman Empire, supposedly the great enemy of Christendom, to pressure other Christian cities.
Wow, that's some serious, real politic.
Or just look at the 20th century. Japan fought against Germany in World War I, alongside Britain and the U.S. Then boom, World War II, they're fighting with Germany against the U.S. And even more recently, the U.S. helped Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War in the 80s, gave them intel support. Then what, 2 years later? Saddam Hussein is public enemy number one. Interests flipped, loyalty followed. Simple as that.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. If power is the motive, what's the engine? The sources seem pretty clear. It's almost always economics.
Absolutely. Geopolitics, you boil it down, it's this constant fight over energy, controlling the sources, the reserves, how it gets transported, who distributes it. Oil is just fundamental. John Stossinger's take on the first Gulf War makes it crystal clear. If Saddam had grabbed Saudi oil, he'd have controlled, half the world's known reserves. The threat wasn't just political, it was existentially economic.
And it's not just oil, is it? The materials emphasize strategic minerals, too. Yeah, they mentioned this U.S. diplomatic cable listing vital resources, bauxite in Guinea, chromite in South Africa, and Afghanistan comes up. Former President Trump explicitly cited the huge mineral wealth there, gold, lithium, coltan, uranium, as a key reason for staying. It's resource security, pure and simple.
And having the resources is one thing, but you've got to move them. That gets us to the sea lanes, the arteries of trade. About 80% of global commerce goes by ship. So if you control the maritime choke points, you basically control global logistics and markets.
Right, the ability to block trade or tax it at places like Suez, Panama, or those critical straits.
Exactly. There are 4 huge ones we focus on: Hormuz, Malacca, Suez, Panama. Take the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the entire world's petroleum passes through that tiny strip of water. Iran's threat to close Hormuz, that's one of their biggest economic levers, purely because of geography. Controlling a few miles of water gives them enormous power.
What's really striking here is how you don't necessarily need bullets and bombs, kinetic war, to cause massive disruption. Financial tools can be just as potent.
That's the whole idea of financial warfare. Liang and Shang Sui, these 2 influential Chinese strategists on modern conflict, they call it a hyper-strategic weapon. Hugely destructive potential. And you didn't remember examples, right? George Soros basically breaking the Bank of England in '92, forced the pound's devaluation, made $1 billion, and shook a major economy.
But it can be subtler, too, right? Using global financial institutions as leverage.
Oh, absolutely. More insidious, perhaps. Look at the Asian financial crisis in the late 90s. South Korea needed a massive IMF bailout, $55 billion. The U.S. attached strings. Terms that forced Korea to completely open its markets, which, guess what, allowed American capital to rush in and buy up struggling Korean companies dirt cheap. Liang and Zhang Sui called it an economic occupation, achieved domination without firing a single shot.
So it's not just protecting your own spot at the top, it's actively stopping others from climbing up the same way you did. That sounds exactly like kicking away the ladder.
It is that theory. Friedrich List talked about it first. John Chang popularized it more recently. The idea is simple. A country uses protectionism, tariffs, subsidies to industrialize. Think 19th century Britain. But once it's dominant, it suddenly becomes the biggest cheerleader for global free trade. Why? To stop emerging powers from using those same protectionist tools to catch up. They kick away the ladder they climbed.
And you can see echoes of that critique in things like the Washington Consensus, right? That package of free market policies pushed on developing countries, often in crisis. It's like saying, do as we say now, not as we did back when we were developing.
Precisely. The rules change once they stop benefiting the ones already in power. Classic move.
Okay, so the goals are cynical, often economic. How do they achieve them without constant war? That seems to be where indirect control comes in, managing what people think.
Yeah, now we're moving into information control, propaganda.
Yeah.
And the sources stress that the basic playbook, it hasn't changed that much. The principles, influenced by figures like Goebbels, unfortunately, are still effective. Simplify everything down to one idea, one enemy. Repeat it endlessly. A lie told 1,000 times becomes truth. And crucially, pitch the message to the lowest common denominator, the least intelligent.
And this isn't just random noise online, it's intentional manipulation. The sources bring up Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, right?
Yeah.
Father of modern PR. He talked about the conscious and intelligent manipulation of public opinion by an invisible government. Chilling stuff.
And that premise that powerful, often unseen groups are shaping public thought, it holds up. One of the biggest tools for this, culture. Soft power. Take Hollywood. It has something like a 70% global market share. It doesn't just export movies, it exports American values. A specific worldview where, good and bad seem pretty clear-cut, unambiguous.
And the state itself has a hand in that. Sources say the U.S. military and intelligence agencies influenced over 800 films, thousands of TV shows. They often deny support if a project is too critical of, say, U.S. foreign policy or military actions, Vietnam, veteran suicides, things they don't want highlighted. So Hollywood ends up being this, unofficial propaganda arm, normalizes military power.
Which all serve the bigger goal. Governing through fear and deception. Philip Zimbardo, the social psychologist, argues fear is the state's most effective psychological weapon. Get people scared enough, feeling under immediate threat, and they'll actually willingly give up freedoms for a promise of security.
And sometimes if the threat isn't there, manufacture it, or at least frame it carefully.
That's the old false flag tactic. Comes from naval warfare, flying the enemy's flag to trick them. Today it could be anything from a physical attack to cyber warfare, engineered to be blamed on someone else. Creates a justification, a casus belli for action. And ultimately, creating a common enemy, whether it's radical Islam, communism, or some new manufactured threat. It's an age-old trick.
Yeah.
Distracts from problems at home, justifies more control, more military spending.
Okay, moving to the last big theme, the hypocrisy. How does international law fit into this world of cynical power plays? It seems like it applies differently depending on who you are.
Robert T. Kaplan put it really well. He basically said, the world is still in a Hobbesian state of nature. Sure, international law exists on paper, but the powerful, they find ways around it, ignore it when convenient. Meanwhile, they make sure those same laws are applied very strictly to weaker nations.
The whole R2P idea, responsibility to protect, seems like the perfect, maybe the most disturbing example of that double standard. It sounds so noble, so humanitarian.
But R2P can often act as a convenient mask for straightforward geopolitical or economic goals. The Libya intervention in 2011 is a case study. France, under Sarkozy, pushed hard for that no-fly zone, citing the need to protect civilians R2P. But what happened right after? The French newspaper Libération reported that the new Libyan transitional government quickly signed a deal giving French companies priority access to 35% of Libya's oil. Payment for the military support, the timing, the sheer quid pro quo. It just strips away the humanitarian pretense.
Wow, that one example really tells the whole story, doesn't it?
It illustrates the mechanism perfectly. And another point the sources really hammer is how often big military mistakes happen, not because of bad tech or tactics, but because of a failure to understand culture, a lack of cultural intelligence.
Afghanistan seems like the textbook case there. The Soviets failed, then the U.S. repeated so many of the same errors, just not getting the local culture.
Yeah, a massive part of the failure was misunderstanding things like the Pashtunwali Code, those deep-seated rules about honor, hospitality, momastia, revenge, bududul. For many Pakhtuns, that code is far more important than any loyalty to Kabul, or certainly to foreign occupiers. It made Western approaches seem irrelevant, sometimes deeply offensive.
And the fallout from that kind of ignorance can be huge, right? Not just strategic, but immediate and dangerous.
Absolutely devastating. The sources mentioned that incident in 2012 at Bagram Air Base. U.S. personnel burned copies of the Quran and other Islamic texts, apparently worried they were being used by detainees to pass messages. Just the catastrophic lack of understanding about how sacred those texts are, even after a decade there. It sparked deadly riots across the country. That cultural blunder probably did more damage than enemy action could have in weeks. Undermined the whole mission. So we circle back from these ground-level failures to the big picture. If the world operates this cynically, what does that demand from leaders? How do you succeed?
It suggests that success isn't about having the perfect, rigid plan, like Jomini envisioned map-based, precise. It's much more about Clausewitz's ideas. Adaptation, being prepared for friction, flexible thinking. The world is, as they say, VUCA. Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. The sources argue the most successful players aren't the ones with the most detailed 5-year plan, but the ones who can pivot, adapt, react effectively when things inevitably go sideways.
What really stands out from all this is that constant tension. You have the public-face democracy, human rights, international law, and then underneath, there's this machinery of pragmatic, sometimes brutal power strategies actually running the show.
Exactly. The cynicism, the self-interest.
Mm.
The sources suggest these aren't flaws in the system. They are the system, the core features.
And maybe the biggest danger highlighted here isn't some jackbooted dictatorship taking over by force. It's something quieter. It's that slow creep towards what Aldous Huxley called the perfect dictatorship. Not Orwell's 1984 with constant surveillance and terror, but Huxley's Brave New World, where people are just happily distracted by consumerism, by entertainment, by this endless stream of information noise. So distracted they become happily imprisoned. They mistake the media kaleidoscope for reality, and they just lose the will or even the ability to question the power shaping their lives. That's the ultimate strategic win. Dominance achieved through engineered apathy,